company. He has more than 30 years of experience in the energy industry that includes both upstream exploration and production and downstream pipeline operations. Hartstein joined Southwestern Energy in 2007 in support services and rose to the position of Vice President of the division before moving to the V+ Development Solutions Division. His current responsibilities, and we'll hear more about this in a minute, include overseeing the company's water stewardship program, ECHO, ECH2O, which stands for Energy Conserving Water. Methane emissions reduction is another one of his areas of expertise through our One Future program, and there are other initiatives that seek to balance the company's impact on the community, the economy, and the environment. Southwestern Energy, as many of you know, is an independent energy company primarily engaged in natural gas and crude oil exploration, development, and production. Southwestern, of course, was an early developer of the Fayetteville Shale in Arkansas and entered West Virginia after investing $5 billion for shale assets in the northern part of the state in late December 2014. Roy, welcome to the conference.
Thank you very much. We have had some great presentations this morning, and I hope that what I'm doing will build on that. There we go. What I want to talk about is the future of natural gas as an energy resource for the United States, and the particularly good position that West Virginia has as an area of resource in natural gas. So we're really looking at energy for the future. Like was said earlier with EQT's presentation, we have to go through our lawyers, and our lawyers say, you have to put this up that nobody can read. The bottom line for us is, I'm very excited about Southwestern and what we do. I hope I get you excited about what we do, but don't invest because of what I say. Do your own research. Southwestern is the third largest producer of natural gas in the United States. Starting back in 2007, when I was with the company, when I first joined the company, we were a very small producer of natural gas. Over the last 9 years, we've grown, and this demonstrates our growth to the point that we're now the third largest producer of natural gas. We're now focused in 3 key areas. Arkansas was our original core. The Fayetteville Shale was one of the newest areas of shale production when we started there in the early 2000s. It grew to be our largest asset. From there, we expanded into the Northeast, into the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, and now in West Virginia. We're focused on just those areas at the moment because the price of natural gas at the moment is so low that we really can't go beyond those areas until we get the prices restored. There's a lot of other natural gas in the United States. This represents all the shale play areas, and shale has become a major resource for the U.S. It's really changed the nature of energy in the United States, changed our outlook, made us energy independent, and it creates a situation where oil and gas can be a vital part of the energy future of the United States, provided that we address the important issues that are brought up about oil and gas development. In our area, we cover the northwest part of West Virginia. It is a core area for us, and it's a core area of future production. You'll see in this slide that southwest corner of Pennsylvania and the northern corner of West Virginia is the core of the core of natural gas production. Some of the most productive natural gas resources in the United States are in this area, and it's going to be an important resource for the United States into the future. This demonstrates the recoverable natural gas into the future. Every year, the amount of resources available continues to grow and continues to demonstrate that natural gas has a long-term future in the United States. Again, production increases. You see here how production has continued to increase. It's plateauing at the moment. Most of the drill rigs around the United States are now being idled. We're down to the lowest level of rigs that have been drilling pretty much since Lincoln was president. Very few drilling rigs are operating today because of low prices. Natural gas will level off. What you're not seeing is a significant drop yet in gas production. When we first started in the shale gas development, there were forecasts that any time we stopped drilling, production would drop off like a rock. Wells tend to have high production early in development, then they begin declining. What we're seeing now is that production is continuing to stay fairly high despite the drop in drilling rigs. So we've learned to be more productive well to well. We're increasing the total production in the U.S. Every well is more productive than the last well. We're learning, and so we've continued to create more resource for the United States for a long-term future. In this area, we talked earlier about midstream assets. How do you get the gas from where we are, where we're producing it, to the market? This will, as we develop the pipeline assets, develop the way to get this gas to market, create avenues to continue to increase production in this area, continue to increase the price in natural gas so that we get back to a $3 range where we can economically continue to produce natural gas, and look for markets locally to take advantage of the market differential that was talked about earlier today with EQT. In West Virginia, there's significant development work going on. There's a lot of production that's being used here in the state. You see increases in the amount of natural gas used for electricity. From IHS, yes, I'm going to back up. Thank you. Am I going the right way? Nope. Go backwards. There we go. Okay. So in West Virginia, there's over $1 billion in labor income from the oil and gas industry. The number of jobs as a result of the industry, we expect that to increase. Southwestern expects to be a vital part of continuing to develop in West Virginia, to create jobs, to bring new revenue to the state, both through jobs, through all the economic development. And we'd like to see new technologies develop that create beneficial use of natural gas here in the state to continue to grow the economy here. So the question for Southwestern Energy is, how do we make sure that there's a long-term future for natural gas? So is natural gas a bridge fuel, or is it really a foundation fuel for a low-carbon energy future? There are a couple of key things in energy production. Two areas that people are concerned about. First is reliability, and second is affordability. Price is one of the most important issues for people who use electricity, who buy natural gas to heat their homes, for industry that uses natural gas as a fuel to drive your business. Those two things have had a third item added to it, and that's low carbon. Climate change is something that we're dealing with as a country. It's something we're dealing with as a world. A low carbon energy future is vital. It's going to be here for us in the long term. We believe the most important fuel is a fuel that can meet all three of those things. And if you can match reliability with low cost, with a low carbon environment, you'll have the premium fuel. Natural gas has 2 out of 3. We are reliable. You can rely on natural gas to drive a generator 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can have reliable power. It's low cost. In fact, it's so low at the moment that we're having a hard time continuing to produce it, but we can still sustain natural gas in a $3 environment. So it will continue to be a low-cost fuel in the future. The issue that we have to deal with is low carbon. And we think there are creative ways that we can deal with that one issue and create an advantage that is superior to other areas that have only low carbon, but at the same time are very unreliable and very high cost. So we think solving one problem is a lot easier than solving 2. And that's where we've created SWN Gas. SWN Gas is Southwestern Energy's look at how do we develop natural gas, dealing with the issues of concern to the community, dealing with sustainability, and looking for a long-term future so that natural gas will be a fuel for the future, not just a fuel for today. We start with our Alpha initiative. Alpha is dealing with natural gas today. dealing with all of the issues about the environment, dealing with water, air, community, to make sure that we'll responsibly develop natural gas for today. And then we add to that Omega. And our Omega initiative is looking to the future. How do we solve the low carbon issue so that natural gas has all three elements and becomes the foundation fuel for the future? In our Alpha initiative, there are three areas we're concerned about: water, air, and community. Help. We'll just go from there. In our water area, Mary Beth mentioned ECHO. ECHO is our energy conserving water initiative. We're looking at how do we use water, how do we use less water, how do we take advantage of the water that we use, recycle the water that comes back, and do things in a cleaner way. We've created a Right Products program, which is how we look at chemicals. You've heard about chemical additives in our frac fluid. We evaluate all the chemicals that we use, look for cleaner, less impactful chemicals so that we use the greenest chemicals we can use. Stream Smart is how we address water protection so that we keep sediment and erosion located on our site, isolated to our site so that we don't pollute the environment. We also have a wellbore integrity program to make sure our wellbores protect the environment and prevent any pollution from the well itself. On the air side, we've created a One Future initiative. We've joined with other companies throughout our industry from upstream to the downstream environment and are looking at methane emissions and how do we reduce methane emissions to less than 1% so that natural gas is the cleanest fuel available in the fossil fuel environment. We also do things like operate our rigs on natural gas rather than operating them on diesel to lower emissions at our well sites. And then we look at community impacts and how we work within the community. This is ECHO, a little bit more about ECHO. In the last 3 years since we launched the ECHO project, we've reduced our total water use by 30%. So per foot of hydraulic fracturing that we do, per foot of wellbore, we use 30% less water. As a result, we've reduced our total water consumption by millions of gallons. We've taken the fresh water that we initially start with on the first well, and we're now recycling so that the second well and the third well, 40% of the water that we use is recycled and reused water, reducing our freshwater use to 60%. So now we've not only reduced the total water, but we've reduced our freshwater impact in the environment where we're working. Then to go a step further, we've created conservation projects so that every gallon of the remaining fresh water that we use, we replace in the environment through water improvement projects, like one in Pennsylvania that we did to remediate an acid mine drainage situation and clean up a river. Again, reducing our methane emissions and managing our air impacts. One Future is our initiative to deal with methane emissions. We look for opportunities to reduce emissions in a way that makes sense. There are a number of regulatory steps that have been proposed. The EPA has proposed regulating existing sources as well as regulating new sources of methane emissions. When they started with dealing with new sources of methane emissions, we introduced the One Future concept to the EPA, and we've been working with the EPA to get accepted a solution that companies will do voluntarily in a way that makes sense rather than being forced to do things that we think don't make sense. So the approach that we took is if we measure our methane emissions, we find the sources and we fix them, we can achieve reductions that are measurable, that will achieve the objectives they have and do it in a way that makes the most economic sense to our own company. The approach that EPA wanted to take was to force us to replace equipment with low bleed equipment when 80% of the equipment didn't leak anyway. So it didn't make sense to replace 100% of equipment when a very small fraction of the equipment was actually leaking. To us, it made more sense to do something like leak detection and repair. In a smart way, look for the leaks, fix them, continue to monitor them, and make sure that we're achieving the objectives to reduce our total emissions. And then finally, we're working on development of new technologies so that we can detect methane sooner and take action to make sure that there's less methane in the environment. This is what it looks like. Today, we have a leak rate of about 1.45%. So in order to achieve a total reduction down to less than 1% methane from wellhead to final delivery, each of the components from upstream drilling, midstream pipeline, transmission lines to final delivery, each segment of the industry is agreeing to limits below the 1% level, so the sum of all of our leak rates will be less than 1%. The good news is industry's already been very successful in reducing methane. This is something you won't generally hear in the media. This reduction has happened since 1990 up to 2012. Substantial reductions in methane emissions have already taken place. A lot of this was about green completions. We used to vent gas to the environment. A lot of the transmission companies used to vent their pipelines to the environment when they had to work on a segment of line. We've all taken action to capture that methane, put it back in the pipeline, sell it to our end customers. Makes a lot of sense to keep gas in a pipe and sell it to your customer rather than blowing it to the environment. We've already been very successful at capturing methane. Our industry as a whole represents about 25% of the methane emissions as a total. Again, if you hear about methane emissions, you might think that the oil and gas industry was the single largest contributor of methane in the world, and yet we represent only 25% of the total. That's still a lot of methane. It's still something worth taking action. And the other 75% in our mind represents an opportunity for us to further increase the reduction in methane so that, like our ECHO project, we could become methane neutral and have zero methane emissions from Southwestern Energy. Finally, community impacts. We do a lot of things in our communities to work with the communities to make sure that we're reducing our impacts, we're communicating our impacts, we're working on how do we reduce truck traffic. Truck traffic is one of the biggest impacts we have on a community. And we've got a logistics center that looks at every truck that moves to our site so that we reduce the total number of trucks and we keep them out of the community at critical times. All of that combined, we think, creates a solution for natural gas that is environmentally friendly to the community, and will have a real positive impact. Moving forward from there, we look at what we call the Omega project. And Omega is dealing with new technologies and use-driven policies that will make sure that natural gas has a long-term energy future. So what kind of technologies might get us there? We think there's opportunities in technologies like fuel cells. A fuel cell will take natural gas, reform it to separate the carbon atom from the hydrogen, use the hydrogen to create electricity, and then if we can find productive ways to use that carbon, like graphene production, we can use the carbon atom, use the hydrogen, not burn natural gas, but instead find a clean way to use natural gas to create energy for the future. We're engaged with companies on looking at the future and looking for research opportunities. How do we create the products that will use natural gas in a way that's productive, that's clean, that removes the carbon atom, that productively uses that carbon in a way to create products for the future, and ultimately benefits the environment, solving that one element of the three so that we have low cost, highly reliable energy production and have it in a low carbon way. Use-driven policies are the way that we look at how do we make this happen. And in the regulatory environment, how do you create downstream opportunities? What is it that we can do in working with regulators, working with government, to help create incentives to drive the use of natural gas in West Virginia for the benefit of West Virginia, to grow the employment base and grow the economic input into this area and continue to develop West Virginia for West Virginians. And again, the regulatory environment is the other piece of that. How do you create and be sure that the regulations in the area help encourage the development to happen, not to drive it away, and continue to maintain that cost advantage that you have locally. There are states that strive to be the strongest, most restrictive state in the United States in every area. They want to be the strongest in methane emissions restrictions, be the strongest in wellbore integrity, be the strongest in every area. And I would say that those states that want to be the leading environmental activists are the ones that are going to drive resources elsewhere, so that drilling activity will happen in areas that you take a common sense approach and work with industry to make sure that we're capturing methane, we're solving the problems of water, we're solving problems with the community, but we're doing it in a way that does it at the best cost. We have a lot of knowledge of what our issues are. We've come up with solutions dealing with water, and our ECHO project is actually cash positive to the company. So we're able to offset our water production, offset our cost of conservation through our initiative, and create a cash positive approach to replacing water. We're doing the same thing with methane emissions. We measure our methane emissions, we've captured the methane, we put it back in the pipe, we sell that, and we actually can pay for the cost of our methane emissions work. By continuing to monitor what we're doing and looking into the future, we find that our costs are actually higher than the methane that we're saving, but we're finding that there's fewer leaks. And so now we can approach the regulators and say, we've solved the problem of the methane emissions, and rather than having to survey on a monthly basis, survey on an annual basis, because we can demonstrate that we've already solved the problem. So by taking creative approaches and taking proactive approaches to what we do, we believe we can do it much more economically than states that take the approach that we're going to force you to do the things the way that we want to do them. We think we have a better way. And finally, the bottom line, West Virginia is well positioned. I showed you the chart earlier, the northwest corner of West Virginia, the southwest corner of Pennsylvania. There's a resource here that's enormous. The most productive wells in the United States are here in this area. The Utica has got tremendous potential. Natural gas has a long-term future in the country. There's an abundant resource that can continue to give the United States low-cost, highly reliable energy, and we think we can do it in a low-carbon way that will ultimately deliver real value for the country on a long-term basis. I think it's not enough just to produce energy and expect that it'll be consumed. You have to be proactive in dealing with the issues and making sure that we're addressing the concerns in the environment in a way that recognizes those concerns, proactively addresses them. We'll need more pipelines, that's been talked about earlier today, to continue to expand the ability to take the natural gas from this area to the markets where it's going to be used. We need to create markets here to drive the use within West Virginia and to grow your economic base here. And then ultimately, the idea of a long-term price stability is important. And I think the abundance of resource we have will continue to be exploited if we do it in the right way. And we'll continue to keep prices stable because there is so much of a resource that as prices go up, the drilling rigs will come back, and they'll come back to the areas that are in favor of development of the resource, not the areas that are against the development of the resource. And I think West Virginia is very well positioned in that area. Finally, technological improvements, technologies that help deal with the carbon issue, that help detect methane and help keep it out of the environment to address the environmental concerns, are the things that are important so that we create a positive energy future. Now with that, I'd be happy to take questions. I'll be interested to see what areas are you interested in natural gas future. Yes, sir. I don't have a count on in the case of Southwestern Energy, we have a few hundred wells that are drilled but not producing at this point. So obviously, as prices come back, those wells will be the ones initially stimulated and brought on production. But it only amounts to a few hundred out of the thousands of wells that we've got. Our total resource base in Fayetteville Shale, we've drilled over 4,500 wells in the Fayetteville Shale. We have 400 wells in Pennsylvania and about 100 in West Virginia, I think, currently new wells in West Virginia. Out of those in West Virginia, there are only a few that are drilled but not producing. And back. Graphene is not necessarily a carbon capture technology. Our interest is in finding new solutions that haven't been found before, and we have not gotten very far with that. We've just launched an initiative with a research company to look at technologies that might be out there, things that we think would be beneficial to be invested in to begin to create that solution. So today there's a lot of demand for natural gas. There's a lot of natural gas being used in energy production. But we think the future, if there's going to be a long-term future, we've got to deal with carbon capture in some way. And I know the coal industry's got the same interest. Any industry that has carbon associated with it needs to deal with the carbon atom. You got to deal with it because you're going to have CO2 when you burn it. How do you capture it? How do you deal with it? Natural gas, we think, is uniquely positioned because there's a way to use the hydrogen separate and not have to burn the natural gas to create energy. I also think that the future natural gas has potential with something like the fuel cell, because distributed energy is going to become a bigger player in the long-term future of energy production in the United States. And a fuel cell that's economic, if we can continue the development of the fuel cell, an economic fuel cell has the potential for distributed energy generation that may make a lot of sense in the future. So we think there's a lot of potential there. Today we're investing in research, fundamental early stage research. That will take bigger investment in the future. Once we know what the potential is, then we've got to make the long-term investment decision on how do we develop that technology and how will that happen. But today it's very early stage. Yes, sir. I'm not a reservoir engineer, and I'm not a completions engineer. I've worked in the downstream industry a lot longer than I have in the upstream. I've been about 9 years now in the upstream. So I don't have an exact answer for your question, Scott, but we're continually getting better at what we're doing, and we're continuing to improve our ability to extract the resource from the rock. Where we are now, the difference between shale gas technology and what we're doing today versus historic production. Historic production drilled into traps. It drilled into areas where natural gas would move and then get caught. So it was in a pool, and there was pressure there, and you could produce it, drill into it, tap it, produce from that area. Now we're dealing with source rock. So we're drilling down into the source rock. We're drilling horizontally across that rock, and instead of having a pay zone that's 100 feet, we're now dealing with laterals that are as much as 10,000 feet long. And so you're fracturing into source rock that's 10,000 feet of lateral, and we're studying those fractures to see how far do they go. They tend to be close to wellbore. They may be a couple hundred feet. And the idea is that you want to control how much fracturing you're doing. So it's an evaluation of pressure that you're applying and the length of time that you apply the pressure, the nature of the rock. And there are a number of technologies that we use to study that to see where the fracture is going. We're running a lot of models. We've extracted in the Fayetteville Shale, we cut out a very large block of Fayetteville Shale where it comes to the surface. We cut a large block, we sent it to a lab, we drilled a sample well into it as a test well, and we did hydraulic fracturing in that, and then we took the rock apart to see what the fractures look like, and where did the proppant go, where did the sand go in the rock, and how effective were we at making that work. So we're doing a whole lot of research to see how do you get to those resource areas and how effective are we at getting the resource out of the rock. It's nowhere near 100%, nowhere near 100%. But every year we get better. In the back. You know, today, when you read about wind energy, solar's come down in price quite a bit because the development of the solar cell is drastically improved. The cost of a solar cell is reduced. When you hear about wind technology, and in particular, wind and solar essentially today depend on something that will make them more reliable. How do you fill the gap? And the gap is when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. You can fill that gap with storage technology, so you can take the energy and put it into storage in some way, whether it's a battery or it's hot salt, molten salt, or you can use natural gas as a resource to burn to create the energy at the time that wind or solar is not available. When you read that wind energy costs are coming down relative to natural gas and natural gas costs are going higher, what you're seeing is the effect of natural gas supporting wind and making it cost effective. So yes, there are hybrid activities going on. The large energy producers, large electricity producers are reliant on fossil fuel technologies to make their renewable energy actually work. So there are complementary processes. We've done some work with the National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado to look at hybrid technologies. NREL is actively working on that. And so there are ways to make that work. I'll give you my opinion. This is not Southwestern Energy's opinion. This is Roy Hartstein's opinion. When you hear that wind energy is more cost effective, it's because you're taking natural gas and you're burning it in its least efficient way. You're bringing it on as a peaking plant. You're running it at the times when there's no energy available from the wind. And you take the least efficient process for natural gas and get a unit cost of that compared to the most efficient process for wind that it runs 100% of the time, or it's used 100% of the time it's available. And you compare the most efficient wind process to the least efficient gas process, and wind energy looks like it's competitive. I don't think wind on its own, well, obviously wind can't stand on its own today because it has to have a way to get the weaknesses covered. So natural gas is the solution, or fossil fuel energy today is the solution that helps make renewables actually work. Other questions? Yes. Methane emissions. It's methane specifically, but CO2e, CO2 equivalent. We can, and it was spoken to earlier that the first LNG plant came online earlier today, and the senator spoke about that LNG exports, she's in support of LNG exports. That's a very good thing. U.S. has a huge natural resource in natural gas that can be used elsewhere. Other countries also have natural gas, and we've had conversations with China about their exploration and their opportunities to explore natural gas. I'm on the International Gas Union panel for sustainability, and so I chair a subcommittee of the Sustainability Committee of IGU, and we're talking about how to drive natural gas use around the world to help clean up the environment. We're sharing with that group, and I was just in South America a couple of weeks ago, and on my committee I've got a representative from Iran, a representative from Russia, a representative from Argentina. At the same meeting we had France, we had the Netherlands, We had Great Britain, and there are a number of U.S. companies that are in other committees, but in this particular committee, we've got quite an international group. We're sharing with them the ideas about methane emissions reductions so that you can make sure that we're not losing the edge that natural gas has. Right now, methane emissions is probably our biggest issue. It's the biggest weak point we have because you read that methane emissions are substantially more polluting than CO2, 25 times more polluting than CO2. So one molecule of methane gets equated to 25. One molecule of methane is equal to 25 CO2 molecules. So it's said that we're 25 times more polluting. We can solve that problem. We can deal with it. We can get our methane emissions down. We just have to take action to make it happen, create technologies that let us detect it so that natural gas is competitive. We're sharing that with the world and with other countries so that they'll do the same thing, and we will be able to get natural gas used throughout the world, which will also create the opportunity for exports in our LNG markets. Yes. Yeah, our One Future was a coalition we created a couple of years ago, and in that we've got National Grid, which is an electric generation company in the Northeast U.S. We've got a couple of midstream companies that gather and deliver natural gas through pipeline. There are a couple of producers besides ourselves that are members, and we're now actively trying to recruit other members to make a commitment to achieve the levels that we're talking about so that each segment of the industry will achieve a level that is a fraction of the 1%, so that end to end, from first production through final use, the sum of all the methane emissions will be less than 1. And that one's based on 1% is based on natural gas being the most effective fuel for all applications, even diesel fuel. So if you use natural gas in a vehicle, it would be less polluting than using diesel fuel in a vehicle. You have to get down below 1% to make that happen. On an power generation side, it's about 3%. Keeps natural gas be the cleanest fuel on the power generation side. Is there a question over here? Now, the questions about pipelines into the Northeast. There are a number of proposals and some that are currently held up in construction. And again, Senator Capito's commitment to work with FERC to help clear those projects is really important. The efforts to stop pipelines are efforts to stop fossil fuels. Has less to do with the impact of the pipelines and more to do with how do you restrict fossil fuels. I think the success that was had with the Canadian pipeline, Keystone pipeline, empowered the environmentalists to attack pipeline operations, to attack any new pipeline development. They felt like we were successful there. That's a good way to stop any fossil fuel development. So if we can stop the pipelines, you can't get gas out of the markets, you can't produce the resource. So commitments from our senators and congressmen to do something about that, to make sure that FERC is dealing with the pipeline issues and advancing the permitting according to the way that we've historically permitted pipelines, is critical to continued development and get the resource where it's needed. Interesting thing about the Northeast U.S. is the largest consumer of natural gas in the United States. It's the single largest market for natural gas. And yet there's more resistance to oil and gas production in the Northeast than anywhere else. New York State and New York City, as a city, New York City is the largest single user of natural gas. And yet the state won't develop their own resources. So they're not doing anything about their use of natural gas, but they don't want to see it developed. And so it's a little bit odd. Yes? Yes, and in West Virginia, there's been a lot of conversation about pooling and developing resources, and pooling is a critical issue here. It's one that we really need to resolve. The challenge with pooling is that you get individuals that have an opinion, that want to stop things, and they don't want to be forced to have resources produced. That individual, if they have their way, then they can prevent the economic development of their neighbors. And so you stop the development and hold things up while you try to resolve the problem. Ultimately, it requires that companies do the right thing in a pooling situation, that you negotiate in good faith, you do everything you can to resolve the issues yourself, and you only fall on that issue if it's what you have to fall on. But I think it can be dealt with, and I think it's important that it should be dealt with so that the resources can be developed and not held up by a single person restricting the activity of their neighbors that other people want to see happen. Another issue that, going back to the pipeline issue, there's a lot of conversation about eminent domain, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about eminent domain when it comes to pipelines. And I've got a friend in Iowa who has a small farm, and he's got a pipeline that's going to cross his property. He's got about 10 acres. He farms 5 acres of that for a local farm market. He's been approached by environmentalists that said, you must stop the pipeline or they'll take your property and you will never farm again. That's what eminent domain is. They're going to come take your property and you won't be able to farm anymore. So that's what people are being told eminent domain is. I worked in the pipeline industry for 20 years, and I had rights of way across the United States that were farmed with every kind of product you can imagine. So I know it's not true. But to an individual landowner who's being told, don't trust the big oil company, trust me, they're going to come steal your land, it creates a real problem. And so we need to be able to educate the public in a way to get them to understand what eminent domain is and what it isn't. And an individual landowner needs to protect himself and needs to take care of his land and make sure it's restored properly, and that they understand what the rights and requirements are for an easement and what they're not. And it doesn't mean your land's taken away. It means there's a use underground, and your use may be restricted. You can't build a new office building on top of a pipeline, but you can farm. Other questions? Let me first address the formula, because we got a funny looking formula on our bottom corner of all our slides, and it addresses the culture of our company. The formula was created at a time when Southwestern Energy was in economic stress and we were having a hard time before the Fayetteville Shale. And that formula stands for the right people doing the right things, wisely investing the cash flow from our underlying assets will create value plus. And all parts of that formula are important to the culture of our company. We want to be the right people. We want to do the right things. But we do operate within cash flow. So our assets and the cash flow we get from the assets are what we will invest in the future. And then every investment that we make, we expect to earn a rate of return to create value, but we expect value plus. And the value plus that's part of that formula and part of my division is how do we create value not only for our shareholders, but for our stakeholders. So how do we make sure there's value in the community where we work, value to our shareholders, value to our landowners that we're dealing with where we're producing gas and creating revenue for them, so that it's a win-win all the way around. So it's very important in everything that we do. To your question about the $3, $3 is a target. It's very soft. It depends on the economics in the particular state or location where we're working, and every state has different economics. So the Fayetteville shale wells produce a certain volume of natural gas and have a cost associated with those. And our break-even point or our point of drilling is a little different than it is in the Northeast and in West Virginia. Here we have highly productive wells, but they also tend to be a bit more expensive. And so the economics are a little bit different here. There's also different regulatory regimes, and so our cost of doing business in the state, based on the state fees and state permit costs and severance taxes, is different in Arkansas than it is in Pennsylvania, than it is in West Virginia. And all of those things roll together to come up with a price that we think is economic. And the more that we've learned and grown and developed and been able to increase the productivity of the wells and reduce the cost, that changes that picture. So 5 years ago, $4 would have probably been our price. Now we think $3 we can economically develop long term, and other companies may be somewhat different than us, because every company's got their own economics. Good. Thank you very much.